So this week we are talking about logistics outsourcing, and the number one thing that you have to get right if you want successful logistics outsourcing, regardless if you're the client or the 3PL, coming right up. So logistics outsourcing is pretty well entrenched in the industry these days. The last time I looked at stats on this, about 85% of companies had some form of their supply chain outsourced, some element of it. With varied success, I have to say. As you probably know, my day job is actually running a management consulting company called Logistics Bureau, and we spend a lot of time taking people through the outsourcing process, trying to match them up with the right partners, and sadly sometimes trying to fix 3PL relationships that have gone bad. So I really wanted to highlight one particular thing this week which will kind of underpin your logistics outsourcing relationships and is so important to get right. And I'm going to mention 5 things. It's number 5. So let's just have a quick recap. You're going to find loads of videos on the channel about logistics outsourcing. There's a complete playlist. I'll put the playlist down below. But you know, it's a very legitimate strategy, and that's why it's so popular. Generally, companies are outsourcing logistics because it tends to be non-core and they want to focus on their core business. Very often they want access to technology and control towers and specialist equipment and that type of thing. It can offer a great deal of flexibility in terms of capacity. One of the things that people get wrong, though, is they think outsourcing logistics is going to save them money. It doesn't very often. And if you think about it, you're asking a service provider to carry out a function that perhaps you do in-house that they're going to make a profit on, and you want to be charged less than it already costs you. So sometimes, you know, that logic doesn't stack up. You can save money if you're particularly bad at it, if you're quite new at it, if you're a smaller operation, you know, if you're inefficient, if you can get economies of scale, all that sort of thing. But I would say generally it's not one of the primary objectives. Okay, so what do we really need to get right to ensure that our logistics outsourcing goes well? One of the things that I see people making mistakes on is rushing it. And we get this a lot in Logistics Bureau, where we consult on this. So, you know, people will approach us and say, oh, look, we want to outsource our warehousing and we want to do it in 6 weeks. Or, you know, we want to completely review our ocean freight contracts and we want to do it in a month. You know, you've got to be realistic about the timeframes. So where you have contract expiries coming up and that type of thing, think well ahead, start planning. You know, if you're going to go back to the market and reassess things, give yourself plenty of time. The second thing that a lot of people get wrong is detail. And I know I go on about this a lot on the channel, but you've got to have lots and lots of detail being exchanged between both parties. From the client, you know, it's all of the product data, the order profile data, you know, customer locations, lots and lots of detail there about the things that go wrong as well. And from the 3PL, you know, the customer really wants to see how you're going to resource the contract and the cost build up and, you know, the breakdown of all the costs and that type of thing as well. So lots of detail is very important. The third element I see that people make lots of mistakes on is the evaluation process. And they kind of get their favorites and they're very easily influenced through that whole evaluation and selection process when they're looking at the bids. You've got to keep that totally objective as possible. And the way that I do that personally with our clients is to kind of take them through a very detailed evaluation. You know, say outsourcing warehousing, there's something like 120 different criteria that we measure the bids on. And that's all done as a group, so a number of people are assessing the bids, so it really keeps it totally objective, so it's very important. Something else I'll throw in at number 4 is don't take a short-term view of outsourcing, whether it be warehousing or transport or whatever it might be. Always expect that it's going to be a long-term relationship and go into it with that frame of mind. You know, it's a little bit like a marriage. You don't get into a marriage thinking, you know, this is going to last 3 years and then I'll go to the market again. I mean, you just don't do that, do you? I'm not suggesting necessarily that you're going to have a warehouse provider or a freight provider, you know, for the rest of your life. But if you select well and the relationship is managed well and there's value on both sides, there's no reason why it shouldn't last a very long time. I have clients who probably had the same freight companies for 15 years or something, and they wouldn't dream of moving because, the service is great and the costs are great, very close relationship and so on. So let's take that long-term view, really important. I almost let slip what number 5 is. What do you think number 5 is? The number one thing that you should be looking for in your outsourcing relationship, all the way through the evaluation, the selection, and the ongoing management. And I'd suggest it's probably the most important thing in any business relationship. You guess what it is yet? Trust. Trust is so important in any business relationship. So how is it relevant, you might be thinking, in a 3PL type relationship? Well, trust has got to be very strong on both sides. Certainly, through the early stages of tender evaluations and things like that, the customer has got to be very open in declaring, details about the operation, the things that are good, the things that are bad, lots of detail, as I mentioned, about products and customers, things that they really want to focus on to improve, things that haven't gone well. I've seen an outsourcing relationship go downhill very quickly because the customer didn't tell the 3PL that they had something like an 8% rate of returns. They'll find out when they start the contract. That's stupid because it's just going to, it's going to undermine the relationship. Why didn't you tell us about this? There's going to have to be extra costs involved and so on. So very important from the customer side, from the 3PL side. Be very sort of open and honest about your capabilities, your capacity, the sort of service that you're going to be delivering, any concerns you have around sort of IT integrations, those sorts of things. Much better to have that all out in the open up front. And people respond to that. So my number one thing to get right for an outsourcing relationship is trust on both sides. What do you reckon? You disagree with that? I'd love to hear your comments down below. Tell me a little bit about some of the 3PL relationships that you've managed, what went well, what went wrong. Maybe if you're in a company that's thinking of outsourcing or thinking of going back to the market, you need some help. So I'll put a link down below where you can actually get more information from Logistics Bureau, and you can actually book a call and have a chat to me about it. But there we go. One of my favorite topics, logistics outsourcing, and the number one thing to get right, trust. Thanks for watching and see you next week. I know if you aren't already subscribed to the channel, do hit that subscribe button. And if you hit the bell, that way you'll get notified every time we have a new video coming out. See you next week. Bye for now.